they often get clouded by the outcome bias of what actually happens on the fourth down.
Fourth down. That's what we're talking about here on the Sumer Sports Show today. Lindsay, Rhodes with Sam Bruchhaus, as always, trying to tackle a subject this week that has clearly generated a lot of controversy this season for one team more than most, and that is the Lions, who have gone for it on fourth down at a relatively high rate since Dan Campbell has become their coach, and who I think most people associate this strategy with, Sam.
This is their identity, and this is the team that has pushed this in the league. You look at some of the numbers, the most total fourth down goes of any team going from 2021 when Dan Campbell became the head coach to 2024 last year, and they've converted at a very high rate. Now, it's going to sound like you would expect them to be the first or second. They have the 10th highest conversion rate in the league in that time period. However, the teams that are above them have like 40 less goes than the Lions. The Lions are going for it at a much higher rate than everyone else, and they are able to convert it despite having a much larger sample size than all the other teams.
And the reason we're having this conversation is because they have converted on those much less lately. They have struggled on fourth down recently. They've gone 0 their last 7. That spans a time period of 3 weeks. They have been called over the years and recently gutsy, risky, aggressive, uber aggressive, stupid, some other phrases that are in that family that I will not repeat on this show. I've also seen the approach in general referred to as a gimmick. Today, we're going to look into all of that with an open mind. I mean, we obviously, Sam and I, have strong feelings based on data about fourth down in general, but we're going to look at the Lions data specifically this season with Sam and with Tej Seth, who will be along in just a bit. And we'll see if maybe there's anything in the data that suggests that they are going for it on fourth down too much, or maybe in the wrong situations. Or is there a play calling issue? Shawn Syed is going to watch all of the film, and he'll join us to tell us what he sees. We're going to see if there's anything that suggests that the Lions should, in fact, alter their approach on fourth down, which many people are calling for, sometimes directly via email sent to our very first guest on this show, who has covered the Lions for 15 years, Dave Birkett from the Detroit Free Press. You mentioned in an article that you wrote earlier this week that you get emails from Lions fans that are angry about the Lions' approach to fourth down. What are the primary points that you hear made?
I feel like you were reading my emails when you said that, because it really is where there's a lot of Lions fans right now that are frustrated with, the lack of success of late. And some of these people have always been against them going for it on fourth down. But I think the biggest, bone of contention right now for people who don't want to see the Lions going for it is that, hey, we've got this team now that's a really good team. Maybe we don't need to do it in as many situations, or this offensive line isn't quite as good as it was. This offense isn't quite as good. No Amon-Ra St. Brown last week. They were obviously down Sam Laporta last week. So some of the key players that they lean on in those situations aren't there, and doesn't make sense for the Lions to keep going for it in those situations. I think I'll throw one other number out at you, and I'm sure you guys know this, but the Lions conversion rate this year is about what it's been under Dan Campbell for, since he took over as head coach in 2021. Last year was a little bit of an anomaly. They were a little bit higher, but he's doing the same things he's always done. And the Lions are having about the same amount of success. It just so happens that they're 0 for their last 7. And that sort of, amplifies this issue in a lot of fans' minds.
So, Dave, going back to 2021, we've seen, at least by the models, that the Lions go for it at a rate that is correct. When they go for it, they probably should go for it, at least as the analytical models are said. From your understanding of the room, of the coaches, how much of this is the book? How much of it is looking at the analytics? And how much of it is just the culture of, we want to play Lions smash mouth football and we're going to be aggressive no matter what?
Yeah, it's all of it. I mean, look, Dan certainly is aware of the analytics of it, the numbers, the percentages, but it's something that, going back to when he came in 2021, it's sort of a mindset that he wanted to put in his players and in the locker room. Like, hey, we are going to win this game on our terms, right? We're going to decide this game on our terms. We want to keep the ball in our hand. And, talking to players over the last 5 years, like, they really appreciate that. I think there is something to be said in the locker room for, our coach trusts us, and that goes offensively and defensively. Like, offensively, you trust us to pick up that yard or 2 yards or 3 yards or whatever it is. And then defensively, there's the fact of like, well, he trusts us that even if we don't get it at midfield, he trusts us to get a stop or hold them to 3 points. So, Dan has said before that, it's a big feel thing when he does it in games, but he knows the numbers. They go over that like every team does. But ultimately, I think that's just who he is. That's what he believes in. That's what he wants his team to be about.
So that first year, this is one of the things that caught my eye was how it actually, I don't even think at the time I was as keyed into the analytics behind it. I'm sure I was to a degree, but what really stood out to me initially was the culture that this was establishing, that he was training them to be aggressive all the time. Like, we don't take plays off. All of them matter. And especially in a first year where you're coaching a bad team, like they won very infrequently and had historically won very infrequently, and you're trying to just shift the mentality. This felt like a very smart approach, right? Like, even if you're losing, every play matters, and we are going to take this fight to them. And then clearly over the years, who they are has changed in the sense that now they are a good team and they've been a good team for a handful of years. There's something about the fact that the consistency that feels very important to me. Like, you can't pick and choose those moments if a big driver of this is culture. And clearly part of it is the probabilities are greater. If you take an extra down all the time, how many more opportunities are you going to have to score? But shoving that aside for just a second, what do the people in the locker room say about the impact that this has on who they like? People want to talk about mindset, motivation, and all that kind of stuff, and those intangibles, and the ways that going forward on fourth down or not taking points might impact you negatively in that sense. But in this way, I feel like it's actually the opposite when I think of the Lions. I think it's actually important to be consistent in that regard. But I'm not sure if that's just how it feels for me or if that's kind of what you're gauging from the locker room too.
Well, I think you're right, because and it's a hard to quantify thing, obviously, right? Like, how does that impact, the chicken or the egg, really, too? Like, who, were some of these guys built that way anyways? Is that how they're wired? But if you talk to guys in that locker room, if they didn't go for it, I think they would be shocked. I think they'd be. It's not just Lions fans, right? Some of these players, they stay out on the field because that's what they come to expect, Dan, to do now when you're in fourth and 3 or less, and you're midfield 40-yard line, whatever, wherever you're at about in that range, even close to the goal line. Like, he just believes in, like, that play is valuable. We're going to get those points, and I think there's a lot of trickle down that the players, the confidence it gives them in some of those situations, the expectation that they have for that, if it's 3rd and 6, I don't need to pick up 6 yards here because we're going to get to 4th and 2 and we're going to go for it on 4th and 2. So I do think there's a whole lot of trickle down that, when you talk to players, that they really appreciate that Dan has built that culture around them. They say not about this, but about a lot of things, right? The standard is the standard, no matter who's coming up and what backup offensive lineman you're trying to play in a given week. I think the same goes to exactly what you said, that the standard is the standard, no matter how good or how bad our team is. We're going to keep this game in our hands, and we're going to go try to win it on our terms.
So notably in the midseason, this team moved from game day play calling duties, going from John Morton, the offense coordinator, to Dan Campbell. There is an open door that Dan Campbell has said in press conferences that could switch at a later date. It hasn't since then. Obviously, one of the things that is a controllable by the coaching staff, but is not necessarily accounted for at the exact time in the fourth down decision models is play calling. Has there been any discussion around the locker room, around the coaching staff, of fourth down failures or just general inability to convert in these short down situations, and that being part of that move? Or was it just more of a general look of, we want to make sure our guys are in the best position to succeed?
Yeah, no, I think the play calling change was as much about, sort of realizing like, hey, we have this team that's a Super Bowl contender, and we think this is the best, thing for us to do is to get our offense back on track, have Dan call plays. He knows what he wants. Maybe, I don't want to say salvage the season because, 7-5, it's not like the season is lost, or when they made that move, certainly it didn't feel lost at the time. But, I think when you look at some of the fourth downs that they failed on, right? They had Amon-Ra St. Brown, sure-handed as any receiver in the game. He dropped a fourth down conversion against the Chiefs. And last week, Jamison Williams had that drop on fourth down coming across the middle. John Morton, the deposed play caller, said he catches that, he probably scores. So I think there's a lot of those play calls that, whether it was John calling plays, in Kansas City, or Dan calling plays last week, that have been dialed up to win, and they just haven't hit on the execution point. And, Dan has said that, even going back to this last game, he said like he wanted the first fourth down call that they had back, that run play to Jahmyr Gibbs. He didn't like that call. There's still some play calling, I think second guessing that he does among himself, but in terms of the overall decision to take play calling duties back, that I don't think that had anything to do with what was going on fourth down. And frankly, they were doing pretty good on fourth down until here the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think that that's another thing that we really need to like hammer home, is that sometimes these things kind of ebb and flow, and they started very strong this season on fourth down, and now they're going through a rut, and mathematically you would expect that to even out to a degree. The one thing that I say to people consistently about this fourth down where the Lions are concerned when they're complaining about them is that they outscored their opponents by 222 points last year. That was by far and away the number one scoring differential in the NFL. Number two was plus 160, right? And I tend to think that this approach was part of the reason why, not the whole thing. They're talented, but like keeping your foot on the gas has, the results have been there, right? Like they haven't won a Super Bowl yet, but to me, that's a separate conversation, because I think winning a Super Bowl is result. Getting to the playoffs is process, and that plus 22 indicates that they did exactly what they were supposed to do against every level of opponent and didn't play down to the level of competition. There are so many things that says about a team. This year, their record is not as good. They're struggling on fourth down at the moment, though not on the season. And they're still outscored. Their scoring margin is still the third highest in the NFC. So they're sitting outside the playoff picture at the moment. But in terms of scoring differential, they are actually near the top of the NFC also. So that also, to a degree, Sam, feels like it points to some degree of variance, like maybe some unlucky bounces or things like that. When you talk about the type of feedback that you're hearing from fans, I would imagine that this gets brought up to the coaching staff and the players in the locker room. I said I point to the plus 222 as like my response to that. What are the kinds of things that they say?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's the freshest thing, right? And so that's why I think fans are so up in arms about this right now, or so curious about this right now, because all of a sudden they're 0 for their last 7, and it happened 0 for 5 in a loss to the Eagles, and then last week, and so people sort of equate that with, the sky falling on the season, which isn't quite the case yet either. But I think what the Lions are saying about that and feeling about that is that. This is us. You know what I mean? I mean, that's really the response. Like, Jared Goff was asked about this a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember what game, but he was like, no, like, we're going to keep doing this. This is who we are. And so the Lions' expectation is that, they're not living and dying, I guess, with one failed conversion or 2 failed conversions or what it is. They realize that this happens in the NFL, and I think that's the other part that's been tough for Lions fans to grasp, is when you're coming off a 15-2 season, when you made the NFC Championship game the year before, and even the year before that, you finished the year so great. Like, everything seemed to be on this constant, like, up, right? Everything was going so great. And now 7-5, it's like, well, that's really what the NFL is. Like there's so much parity, and it's tough to win 15 games, but things felt so great the last couple weeks or the last couple years that it doesn't feel the same right now. And that's really about the same with the fourth downs that, fans liked it, appreciated it early on. And now when things aren't going so well and the record isn't quite as great, that's where some of the issues come in, I think.
All right. All of this, I think, has set the table very nicely, a good basis with which to start our investigation. Dave, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
No problem. We'll talk to you guys again anytime.
So we've got some things that we need to look into, and we've got just the person to look into those things with. Tej Seth from the Stats and Scheme newsletter, which if you are not subscribed to, you should be. And we'll tell you a little bit later on how to do that. Tej happens to be a lifelong Lions fan. And if you want to feel old, listen to him tell you when that lifelong started.
It did start in 2008, which was the 0-16 season. I have this very distinct memory of jumping into like a pile of snow with my friend outside his house. And his dad came out and told us, you guys need to come in. The Lions might be the first ever team to go 0-16. And we watched the fourth quarter, like in their house. I like remember this like clearly. I was like, wow, I cannot believe that they're the first team to go 0-16, but then became a lifelong fan somehow after that. So
Tej is also a data scientist. So he and Sam are going to walk us through what the numbers say about this team this year. First, Tej, I would imagine that you, as a Lions fan and as a data scientist, probably hear a lot of the same complaints that Dave has heard from fans when you hear people get angry that they're going for it on fourth too much. Like, what do you tell friends?
yeah, I mean, I do have a lot of friends from high school, friends that I grew up with that get angry whenever the fourth down aggressiveness decisions don't work. And I think that they often get clouded by the outcome bias of what actually happens on the fourth down instead of the decision itself before we even knew what the outcome was going to be. And Dan Campbell is someone who has been very aggressive since the first day that he started coaching the Lions. Fourth downs was a huge reason why the Lions had so much success these past couple seasons, making it to the NFC Championship game 2 years ago, getting the 1 seed in the NFC last year. And now they're just hitting the bad variant side of fourth downs. But it's the identity of what Dan Campbell has pushed for this Lions team. And it's usually backed up by the math on whatever decisions he's making. So I do think that they've been a big part of the success up until this season. And this year, they just haven't worked out as well.
So just to illustrate a little bit more about the bad variance, I'm going to give you some stats and I want your thoughts on them. Last year, the Lions were one of the best teams in history at accumulating EPA on fourth downs. I believe they were technically the third best going back to 2016 in total expected points added on fourth down go situations. This year, that is pretty much completely flip-flopped. 20th in EPA across all fourth down snaps, despite going for it at a very high rate, 16th in EPA accumulated per fourth down go. So can you explain a little bit more the regression of what we've seen this year and what that may mean moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, those are really good stats to bring up. I think the first point is there's a lot of luck involved in these small sample size, subsets that we look at, like fourth downs, like where you don't get enough plays to truly determine if a team is good or bad at fourth downs at this point in the season. So I think that's definitely played a role, and the Lions were probably lucky last year, like you mentioned, and then unlucky this year. But there are some underlying aspects of the Lions offense that are probably causing them to be worse at fourth downs this year. One, you lose Ben Johnson, who, you can see what he's doing with the Bears right now. Like, he is one of the best play callers in the league, one of the best play callers in high leverage moments that I've seen in the NFL. So I think that's been a big reason for it. And then the other reason is the interior offensive line play has just seen a huge downgrade this year, where, you go from the offensive line being like the strong suit of your entire team to a situation now where you just feel uneasy about both of the guards in the center on every play. And I think that's been a big reason why they haven't been able to convert as many fourth downs as well.
Yeah, and just to add some data to that, Lindsay, when you look at our Sumer scores, particularly at the guard position, they moved from Kevin Zeitler, who we had on a lot of our Pro Bowl All-Pro Sumer Sports list last year, who had a All-Pro level Sumer score last year, to Tate Ratledge, the rookie, who is having slightly above average starter season right now. And then Graham Glasgow, who they've since moved to the center position, was at about that above average. We haven't seen that level of play from Christian Mahogany, who is now out due to injury, and they're trying to replace him with various other people. Move that over to the center position, where Graham Glasgow is now playing at that slightly above average level at the center position. Frank Ragnow had one of the best seasons that we had seen, Lindsay, at the center position. So it is interesting to see how some of these facets play into their total performance. But Tej, I want to hammer something home. This is still one of the best offenses in the league when it comes to some of these statistics, right?
It is. The Lions offense has done a really good job this year of taking advantage of below average defenses. Like in those games, they're putting up a lot of yards, a lot of points. You see the explosiveness in games like the Bears game early in the season or the Commanders game a couple weeks ago. I think the area that the Lions offense has struggled in, and a reason why they aren't like the one seed in the NFC this year, like they were last year, is just like their Goff is just getting pressured more often. And when he's kept clean, he's almost always a top 5 quarterback. But when he's pressured, he's usually towards the bottom of the league in terms of his production. When he has a pass rusher coming straight at him, and he's just having that happen more often to him this year. And you're just seeing like certain games, like both Packers games this year, where that pass rush is just able to get to Goff multiple times and really disrupt drives as you try to put up points. So I think that's just the difference between the Lions offense year to year with the pressure aspect.
Let me ask you what they're doing on fourth downs, and if they're doing anything different on fourth downs this year than they have done on fourth downs in years past. And then we can kind of get into whether or not that has to do with some of the issues that we've seen here. Are there any patterns that have emerged in that way?
Yeah, I mean, one of the patterns with both when John Morton and with Dan Campbell calling plays is they really like to run the ball on fourth downs this year more than they were in the past. And we saw it in that Thanksgiving game against the Packers, where they had a series where they did first 3 plays run. I believe it was a 4th and 3, and they went back to the run, and they actually lost 2 yards and didn't end up converting the 4th down. And so they've really tried to just use what they think is the strength of their team in short yardage, which is the running game. And I think that's been a slight issue this year. And then the other issue is not having a reliable third pass catcher on fourth downs. Like in the past couple of years, you would see someone like Tim Patrick 2 years ago, or Khalif Raymond and Sam Laporta last year, where like when you look at Amon-Ra St. Brown and he has 2 guys around him, like you can go to your secondary options and find them. But this year, you're just not seeing a secondary pass catcher emerge like that. Jamison Williams has had an up and down year. Sam Laporta and Brock Wright at the tight end position have both been injured. And so it's just a little bit tougher for them to find answers on dropbacks when they have to go away from St. Brown on those plays.
So I like that you mentioned some of the personnel issues, because talking about those skill position players, that's been the strength of this Lions team going back to their success, even when they were around a 500 team a couple years ago. I think what has been interesting that I've picked up on in our Sumer scores has been the drop off of David Montgomery. Last year, he was performing at an impact starter, borderline Pro Bowl level, and now he is back slightly above average. He's doing okay, but he's not really knocking the ball out of the park. And it felt like in previous years, they were able to do that kind of smash and dash, where dash was Jahmyr Gibbs. We've seen Jahmyr Gibbs rip off the extremely big, explosive plays. We have not seen the success, as you mentioned, on those short yardage. How much of that is dealing with David Montgomery, and how much of that is just dealing with changes in the offense?
That is a great point. When you look at Jahmyr Gibbs, especially early in the season, like down to down, the rushes weren't as successful as you would have expected them. Like he is just like one of the most explosive players in the league when he has the ball in his hands, and that's his specialty. And then you have David Montgomery, who is still a good running back, but definitely not what he used to be. And you couple both of that with the interior offensive line issues that we were talking about earlier. And it's just harder to run in between the tackles on 4th and short when there's 7 or 8 defenders in the box defending that. The Lions have found a lot of success, running against light boxes this year in like neutral situations, but when it's heavier boxes, and the defense is kind of keyed in on the run, it becomes a lot tougher to convert those situations.
What is the pass rate versus run rate, Sam? I know you dug into a lot of data. I want to get into some of the like nitty-gritty data points here with regards to the Lions and 4th down, and then we can kind of see where that takes us conversationally. In terms of pass rate and run rate, what are we showing?
Yeah, so on 4th downs in particular, they're at about an average pass rate. That is high because it is 4th down at 72%. And it was similar in the years 2021, 2022, 2023. The interesting part is last year it was extremely low. A lot of this can be situational. A lot of this has to do with play sequencing, as Tej mentioned in that Packers game, run, and then you flip in another run. But that's what we're seeing this year. And I think a couple interesting parts that Tej has said have caught my eye. Number one has been Goff under pressure. Last year, we saw kind of an anomalous year from Jared Goff. He performed extremely well when under pressure. And this year, it just hasn't been there. So it sounds like, Tej, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that we're seeing a lot of regression from an offense last year that was a historical powerhouse. Is that correct?
For sure. Yeah, it's been what you just mentioned there. The Lions were insane, like when they were passing behind the line of scrimmage last year, just cuz like the scheme and what the skill position players were providing, that's not as good this year. There's just a lot of areas where Lions were just like getting very easy hidden yards that they're just not able to as well this season.
Timeout. I got to back up here because you said 72% pass rate on 4th down, and that's league average. And my mind can't focus on anything else that you've said because I'm thinking of 4th down situations where you would typically go. That's usually a short yardage situation. We're not talking about 4th and 8 very frequently, I would imagine. Why are they passing so much? Like, why would anyone pass at that rate in a 4th and 1, 4th and 2, 4th and 3?
So I think you have to think about how to truly be efficient at this. And so something that has always caught my eye has been on go for 2 situations, which is technically like 2 or 3 yards. Typically you see a high pass rate there as well. You also got to consider a lot of these 4th downs are end of game situations as well, where it is those 4th and 5, 4th and 6, 4th and 7.
Are they for the Lions?
Not particularly for the Lions, but I'm saying when you're looking at the league average, right? You got to consider those kind of like 4th down half situations when you kind of got to have it. And as a result, that adds in that group as well.
Okay. That just feels like I would imagine a very, very, very lopsided run rate here. And I think most people probably would expect that too. In terms of the other things to come off of 4th down, how successful are they? Like, what are we actually talking about here in terms of where they rank in EPA or whatever other kinds of stats that you want to say here? Because we're talking about them, they've gone 0 for 7, and now we're freaking out. It's all bad, right? At the beginning of the year, I actually just found a tweet of mine where they went for it. They converted 6 of their first 7 4th downs to start the year. So that kind of speaks to maybe a little bit of the variance that you're talking about, like a very, very insane conversion rate to start off with. And now it's very, very low, and the math will math and it'll kind of meet in the middle. But in terms of their EPA on these downs, what is it? Where does it rank? Are they much better or worse than anyone else?
So where it ranks currently in terms of expected points added is at the bottom of the league. And I think the true question here is, number one, is that variance? I think Tej has done a really good job of delineating. Yes, it probably is variance. Number 2 is, they're just a couple, because this is a small sample size, they're maybe 1 or 2 conversions away from being one of the better teams. And so you look in particular at that Eagles game where they go practically 0 for 5, and you look at some of these situations. There was a situation where they could have gone for a field goal attempt situation. It was a slight nod towards this, but then there were other situations that were a little bit more kind of not exactly the ones that you want to go for. You're across the 50 and you're throwing the ball. You would have to throw the ball in order to get the 4th down. And it's kind of changing because of what we've talked about many times about, kickoff and where that ends up being and so forth and so on. But when it really comes down to it, the thing that has dropped them, Lindsay, has been the last 3 games, or in particular, the Packers and the Eagles games, and not being able to convert in those games. And it's a real thin line between being an extremely successful team at this point in the season through week 12 and being a team like the Lions, where Dave is getting emails saying that they got to change their strategy. And I think that's what we have to keep in mind here. And Tej, I'm interested in your thoughts about what you think may happen going forward, given the ideas of regression and stuff like that, because it is this thin line.
Yeah, those are really good stats to bring up when you look at the success of the Lions this year. And you definitely see that in the numbers of what I've looked at in terms of success rate. Like, I think first 4 weeks of the season, they ranked right around like 10th or 11th in terms of 4th down success rate. And then since then, it's been like 22nd, 23rd ranked team in the league. And so, that's just kind of like the roller coaster ride that you go on when you choose to be aggressive on 4th downs like the Lions are. The key the rest of the way will be if the Lions can still stay aggressive in these decisions despite not having the success that they're accustomed to. I personally think that they will, just because it seems to be the mentality of the team. But we have seen situations before where aggressive coaches have become more conservative in these situations because they have a bad run of 4th down luck.
Yeah, and great point there, Tej. Lindsay, to that point, they have maintained this ability all the way through the Packers game. They are still near the top of the league in 4th down goes. They've gone for it 25 times. That is tied for 4th. And, 3rd and 2nd and 1st are just a couple above them. And they're still near the top in 4th down go rate. They are 5th. They are 29% of the time. They are going for it on 4th down. So this is a team that it is part of their identity. And I think it's going to be key, especially given what we've established. This is a good offense. Sure, they've had some regression. Sure, they've had some injuries, but all things tend to regress back to the mean. And I think what Tej just said has indicated to me that the mean of how they do on these 4th down snaps is better than what we have seen this year. They typically have loved to go for it on 4th down. They still love to go for it on 4th down. So it's maintaining the process is going to be key here in order to continue to go for it on 4th down. I think it's going to end up a little bit better for them.
Tej, just because I know that you can probably think of the specific examples here as a Lions fan, one of the arguments that people make is that situations are different, right? Like that you can be aggressive and you can do this. And I mean, I take issue with some of the adjectives that people attach to the 4th down strategy, but that's what you hear it referred to as. And then they say there are some situations where it's just stupid. And for instance, that game that cost them the chance to go to the Super Bowl is one that people will refer to forever, right? Do you think that there is any validity to that argument from people that sometimes the Lions are hyper aggressive, or like this is a concept that's good in theory and you can do it most of the time, but sometimes you just have to be smart? Do you witness them not being smart in some cases, or do you think the process is the process and the process will reward you more often than not?
Yeah, that was a really good point to bring up, because there have been situations I've observed where the Lions were almost more aggressive than what you would have been recommended to do in that situation with whatever model you use to make your 4th down decisions. The prime example, which is relevant since they're playing the Cowboys again this week, is choosing to go for 2 when you didn't have to from the +7 yard line against the Cowboys on that Saturday night game 2 years ago, which was just like an insane decision. I've really never seen anyone ever come to that conclusion where you want to win the game from the 7 when you didn't have to, and you very well could have just kicked the extra point and gone into overtime there. So that's been one of those. There's also been other situations where like they're sometimes better off kicking the field goal and going up like a certain amount of score that usually is beneficial to them, that I've seen them go for it in. But generally, like in 95% of decisions, with whatever process they're using to come to these decisions, they're getting it right most of the time, which is again a big reason why they've been so successful these past couple seasons.
Was Troy Aikman on the call for that 4th and 7? And did he say the analytics said to go for it? I'm just kidding. That's a hypothetical. Tej Seth, you're the best. Thank you so much. And everybody, if you are not already subscribed, the Stats and Scheme newsletter could be in your inbox. Tell people what they're missing, Tej.
Yeah, I appreciate this. Been a lot of fun to do it with Shawn this year. I just throw data on there, and then he makes it look good in the writing. So we have game previews, we have leaderboards for our Thursday newsletter, and then we have game reviews and summaries of the best performers for our Monday morning newsletter. So appreciate everyone that's been reading so far this year.
Can subscribe at sumersports.com, and I promise you it will be a welcome email that will show up in your inbox. Most of them are not. Tej, thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
All right, one more guest now, and it is the other half of that Stats and Scheme newsletter, the aforementioned Shawn Syed, taking a break from all of his tape breakdowns to tell us what he has seen with the Lions. Shawn, we talked about some of the things that Tej saw when he was watching his team. I know that you went back just yesterday and watched every single 4th down that the Lions have run, all 25 of them. I think the main thing that I want to hear from you is whether you thought any of this had to do with like play calling. Is there something that with their approach this year that feels different, that could be altered moving forward without altering the actual approach of going for it on 4th down as a concept?
I think you could look at some of the things last year, the year before that of course, Ben Johnson has just absurd creativity. But then when I looked at some of these clips, you're thinking back to that Ravens game where you're handing the ball off to Amon-Ra St. Brown and he's pitching it out to the running back. They run a similar kind of concept again later on a 4th down. And as you mentioned, it's 25 plays. This is not a 550 play cut up from 18 weeks, right? Like this is such a small sample size that is so volatile. Because for me, when I was taking away, like, what am I thinking about after watching these? There's like 4 or 5 plays that are real toss up. Like, is that a drop? Like, that is kind of a drop. I think we can think back to Thanksgiving where, yeah, the throws behind Jameson Williams, you hope that you're able to connect on that. And if I'm saying, okay, there are 4 plays now that are falling in your favor out of a 25 play sample size, that is going to juice your numbers. It's going to feel like more like it was last year. So I think you could say, all right, well, the execution on some of these run plays is not as good as it should be. And then someone could say, hey, smart guy, if execution's bad, then maybe their assignments should be a little bit different. And that is on the concepts. But I just feel like, hey, if you're going to be a team that is going for it on 4th down, which I think is a smart idea, you are living in a world where a little bit of volatility, it might feel like a lot in a small sample size.
How many drops did you think you saw?
I think you could argue for probably 4 ish. Like I'm fine if you say like, hey, this is a little bit on the throw, this is a little bit on the receiver. Like I don't have to be like, oh, the receivers aren't able to catch the ball, so this is a problem. I think that those are situations where it's like on an even play, you're probably getting a completion in that situation. So I think we could say 4.
And Sam, of the 25 4th downs that they have attempted, how many have they converted?
On the season, they have converted 13 of these 4th downs.
Okay, so 13 out of 25 is a 52% conversion rate. If you add 4 more to that number and you make it 17 out of 25, are we looking at something in the high 60s?
I think that's like 68, right? And look, I think it might be a little unfair for me to come on here and be like, oh, drops are the only reason. Like, if you catch the ball, like, yes, you still have to be able to do that. So I think maybe that's a little unfair to say, oh no, like we just hand wave it. I just think like we have to understand that if we're playing this variance game, there are going to be times where it runs cold. And I don't think that that means like we have to unfold the entire process here.
Yeah. And for context, Lindsay, that's the whole standpoint on this variant stuff and why we like to put it in historical context as well. Like this is still about an average year in terms of conversion rate going back to 2016. Now, the league has changed since 2019. The league has changed since Dan Campbell took over in 2021. That being said, we're talking about 4 plays here. 4 plays gets them in the top 10. 4 plays probably wins one of these games for them. And I think Shawn, especially highlighting that Ravens game where you have an innovative play that ends up practically icing the game for them. I think this is why this strategy has to continue. Do you agree?
I mean, absolutely, right? Like if I'm coming on here and saying, okay, well, there are these 4 plays that would be this massive swing. And even if you tell me, hey, this is a 50% chance that this ends in a completion, where I think that you'd probably feel a little bit more comfortable than that, then you're betting that going forward, the variance is going to swing back in your favor, right? Like it is going to swing when you keep on having these opportunities. And this is all to say, yes, you have interior offensive line issues. Yes, I think you probably feel less comfortable about some of those inside runs. I'm sure, as you mentioned on the pod so far, they have a higher pass rate on some of those 4th downs. But it's hard for me to look at this and say anything other than, you just got to trust the process here. But I understand fans being like super upset about this. Like it has to be frustrating to be known as you're the 4th down team. This is so great. Okay, now you're like getting that swing back a little bit. Where, as Sam said, you're still kind of that league average in terms of your 4th down conversion percentage. But, unfortunately, the results are so important where sometimes I think the process might be a little bit forgotten.
We talked earlier about their pass and run rates on 4th down. So we're passing at a 72% clip. What is the success rate on those plays? Sam, can you set the table for like how well they're doing on passes versus runs? Are they struggling on one versus the other? Again, this is a very small sample, and this entire episode is dedicated to splitting that one hair. So I want to hear the numbers, and then I want to hear what you've seen on those passes or runs. Obviously, it sounds like from a passes standpoint, we kind of heard about the drops there, but.
So let's just take a step back on this, because as pretty much everyone has stated, like this is such a small sample size. There's so much variance. And functionally, as Dave told us, they treat 3rd and 4th downs the same. Like they view these as extra valuable downs that they can maintain really good production on. And so let's take one step back and look at their production in the pass and the run on late downs, 3rd and 4th downs. You look at their performance amongst the league right now in EPA per pass, they're 14th. So slightly above league average. They're not doing terribly, but in EPA per rush, they're 31st. Now, this is across all late downs, Shawn. Are we seeing this same type of struggle on 3rd down as well? Or is it those super high leverage turnover on down situations on 4th downs that's really killing them in this statistic?
Yeah, I think thinking about 3rd and 4th down is the same. I think that might be a little bit unfair to the process. I do think like they have interior offensive line issues. Like that is clear. I think that, I know the numbers are telling us that Jared Goff has struggled under pressure this season, certainly as compared to last year. I think back to the kind of start part of last year where Goff was kind of nails under pressure, if I'm remembering correctly. And then he makes his way into the MVP conversation almost because of it, right? So I do think that kind of under pressure situation is really causing them a bunch of issues. And it's going to be interesting to see because you still have some good teams kind of going forward. So I do think that some of those issues on 3rd and 4th down, like they feel different from each other, but they still kind of describe, right? This is the whole entire project of the Lions offense that is still ranking quite well by EPA per play, right? This is not a bottom of the barrel offense by any means, but it is these unfortunate, just small windows. You get this team into 3rd and long. I think you can feel a little bit more comfortable where, maybe you're not able to produce as much on some of those deep shots this season.
So you can go look up these EPA numbers that we're talking about here on late downs at sumersports.com in the data section. And then there are filters for early down and late down. What I think is fascinating about the picture that you just painted for us on late downs is if you go filter for early downs, 1st and 2nd, Lions are number 1 in EPA per pass. Very, very good on 1st and 2nd. They are 3rd in EPA per rush. So can you explain to me why they are so good on those early downs and that then the numbers are so different on the late downs?
Yeah, let me set up the data perspective first, because I'm really interested in what you've seen, especially from that personnel side, as you said. So if you want to filter for guys that have had like 100 carries, I think there's like 37, 38 of those guys. Jahmyr Gibbs is second in EPA per rush. But then when you look at down by down success rate, that goes down to 11th. And so what we're figuring out there is that the Lions are able to generate these immensely explosive plays using Jahmyr Gibbs in the running game in the early down kind of, you don't know if they're going to pass, don't know if they're going to run. This is a play action heavy team. And thus they're able to utilize some of those instances to spring Jahmyr Gibbs early on. And then he runs for 67 yards. We've seen with speed past everybody and score, but the down to down success rate has not been 100% there. It's more around like what we would expect, a middle to bottom tier certified starter to be at. And so when it starts getting into those tight situations, and you don't necessarily need a certified explosive play, and Tej kind of hit on this as well, and Shawn mentioned the interior offensive line, I think that it comes down to a little bit of personnel. Would you agree, Shawn?
I think it's so, right? On the inside of the offensive line, certainly. Like, it's a real bummer that you're not going to get Frank Ragnow, who I hope Frank Ragnow's hamstring is doing okay. It sounds like it's in a little bit of a tough spot, but
Is it attached?
I just hope that when you're an offense that is going to create a ton of conflict by being under center, you have a little bit more of an advantage on early downs. And when you're in a predictable pass situation, I mean, we know third downs are volatile across the league. Like, that is what they are. That is going to be on a year-to-year basis, something that it can be up, it can be down. And this year it feels like, all right, you're down at certain points where also some of those inside runs that people love when Ben Johnson had, like, we're going to hand the ball off inside on 3rd and 5 to get to a shorter 4th down, but it's actually going to end up being conversion. Feels like maybe you don't have those kind of in the same way. So it's going to be interesting to track because we still have some weeks of data. There's a realistic possibility that it straightens out, but then there's also the point that, maybe you just step back a little bit on that offensive line that shows up on the film, that shows up in the numbers, and then that kind of just really, really ruins this whole entire project.
I might be asking you to repeat yourself, but just for clarity, I can imagine that some people would listen to the disparity between those early down and late down numbers, and then the reasons for why, from a personnel standpoint, maybe we're not as built to be successful in these short yardage situations as we are on the earlier downs. And if I were somebody that was arguing against them going forward on 4th down all the time, I might say that you just sort of helped my argument. Like, we're not as good in those short yardage situations. Maybe there is an argument for, like, we're not the team this year to do that. What would you say to that, Shawn?
I think my answer would be, well, like, do you care about the hiring your win probability, or do you not? Because yes, I understand, like, if you are, or there is a world, right, where your team's, like, your conversion probability is a lot lower. So, like, this generic model that it will get published is different than your internal model. Like, I absolutely appreciate and understand that. But these situations, like, I don't want to be watch the film. Like, there are 4 clear examples where it's like, this should be a completion. This should be a positive situation. And then it's like, okay, well, this number, it flipped so crazy. So I think, yes, you can say, all right, well, our team as a whole is maybe not in the same way. To me, though, the answer to that is not, let's not go for it on 4th down. It's, we're going to have to adjust our approach a little bit because, I am by nature aggressive. Like, I'm not going to get fired if the Lions don't get their next 7 4th down. So I want to lean in that way. And, forgive me, guys, for really enjoying points on the board.
All right. I think that's a pretty good note to end on. Shawn Syed, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, Sam. So a lot of ground covered there. I think that one of the things that Shawn touched on there in his last answer about win probability is maybe part of the disconnect that's happening here is that win probability is highly mathematical and sometimes it's not intuitive. And so it's hard for somebody sitting on their couch to go like, oh, this is what they're going by. And also, I actually think the biggest part of the disconnect here is history. Like, a lot of us, myself included, grew up watching football where 4th downs were treated a certain way and they meant one specific thing. You punted, you kicked a field goal, or you went for it occasionally only if you were, like, down and desperate and running out of time and, like, let's go be aggressive because we have nothing to lose, that kind of thing. So I sort of think that the entire thought process has shifted entirely. Like, you have to just look at it completely differently. Can you explain what teams and people in buildings are now, why they're doing this? Like, what is the thought process, taking the math out of it with the win probability stuff? Because clearly old school football people who grew up in football with the same types of thoughts that I did, who are now in position to be head coaches, they're on board because we're seeing it everywhere. It's not just the Lions. What is the general concept of why we're going for it on fourth down more frequently now?
Right. I think the general concept, now that we have quality sample size, starting mostly when people started to go for it a lot in 2019 and being supercharged by having to match serve practically with Dan Campbell and a couple other coaches across the league in 2021 and beyond, is that if you were to take a step back and you were to look at the teams who generated the most expected points added on fourth downs, whether they decided to punt the ball or whether they decided to kick a field goal, all fourth downs, including special teams, the best teams on record are some of the teams that we think about going for it on fourth a lot. Last year's Washington Commanders are at the top of that list. That was a team that shocked a lot of people. Obviously, Jaden Daniels played extremely well, but going into that year, we didn't think they were an uber talented team. They were able to add a lot of expected points by winning on fourth downs and going for it on fourth downs. And again, this is including special teams. The second team, the Kansas City Chiefs, this year have completely changed their strategy surrounding fourth down. Andy Reid, an older coach, has changed his mind about how he's approaching these. They are more aggressive on fourth down. They have seen the benefit. Now, maybe it's not showing up in the win column, but they've seen the benefit. And then finally, we've talked about it a couple times. The 2024 Detroit Lions are the poster child of this. They were able to run the score up on everyone. You start including some other sample sizes. We're not seeing, again, across fourth downs, including special teams, you don't really see a team going back post 2019 that wasn't aggressive. The Baltimore Ravens were ahead of this many, many years prior than everyone, or a really, really good team like the Kansas City Chiefs. You don't see them taking advantage of this fourth down. So I think that's what Dave said about the Lions valuing fourth down at a different rate than everyone else. I think that comes into a key item, and it really helps it put in perspective that there's true value other than just giving the ball to the other team on these fourth downs. And you got to make sure to take advantage of that.
It's the extra play and the
Right.
accumulation of adding up that many extra plays over the course of a
Exactly.
season. That lands to me as somebody who can hardly do math, right? Like, if you say, so for instance, if we have 3 possessions and it's the difference between 3 downs, 3 chances per possession on each of those 3 or 4. So now you go from 9 to 12. You've added an entire other possession just by going for it on fourth down each of those times. And so the probability that you're going to score goes up, or that you're going to convert and that's going to lead to a score. It makes sense to me that ultimately your opportunity to score would increase. I do want to go back to what you said about the 2025 Chiefs being the team that has now gone for it the second most historically this season, and the fact that they are not having success. And I'm sure a lot of people were like, that is not a ringing endorsement of this because they're 6-6, but their scoring differential, and I fully understand the name of the game is to win the games, not to outscore. Like, nobody is giving points for scoring differential. But if you're looking for a sign that a team is playing well, everybody agrees scoring differential is actually a very good barometer. So they are plus 73 in scoring differential this year at 6-6. Last year, they were 15-2 in the regular season, and they were plus 59. So to me, this paints a story of like weird lucky bounces maybe and variance to a degree. It could also, I suppose it could point to specific game management situations. I don't know. What do you make of the difference in the scoring differential? It's incredibly different. The scoring differential and the actual record.
Yeah. So to better define what you mean by this is a barometer, we found in particular that point differential is a better predictor of future success, so the upcoming weeks, than just sheer win total. And so when you start breaking it down, there are things based off of point differential and based off of matchups against teams and team strength that do this. The teams, the Chiefs really are more of a 7.5 win or an 8 win team when it really comes down to those core predictive metrics. And that means that they're one of the better teams in this league. And that means that they're probably better than just a 500 record. And that, so exactly what you said, Lindsay. There's some weird variance, maybe some defensive regression that we've seen. Maybe they've had a harder strength of schedule, which isn't exactly getting much easier down the stretch. But as a result, it's a small sample size sport. And the items that are predictive are saying that the Kansas City Chiefs are a good team. They are saying that Patrick Mahomes is playing extremely well. That is why you're seeing the analysts like me and Tej really stick to their prior, is the term that we like to use, on the Chiefs, that the Chiefs are one of the better teams in the AFC because of the metrics like this, because the correlation between future success and things like point differential and things like ELO ratings and things like Pythagorean win totals are better barometers. And that's also why they show up so well in these fourth down statistics as well. So odds are, in the next 3 or 4 weeks, as we close out the season, they end up winning a close game that they haven't won in the past because they are going for it on fourth down and because of those scrambles that we love seeing in these clutch moments on third and fourth down from Patrick Mahomes, because they've been very good at it this season.
So fascinating, this team in 10. I think all of that makes sense. And that kind of matches up with what a lot of us were just watching the games feel like. I have a sense that, like, in a lot of ways, Kansas City feels better this year watching them play football than they did last year. And yet they won a lot of games. Then on the flip side, in the AFC this season, I'm watching Denver, for instance, and I'm not necessarily feeling like they're a team that I have a whole lot of confidence in on the offensive side of the ball in particular. Defense is great, but like the offense, I'm like, I mean, I don't know how they're 10-2. You know what I mean? Like, there are teams that we watch where we're like, it just feels lucky to have a specific win-loss record. And then in Kansas City's case, maybe a little bit unlucky. So I totally agree with you. I have not moved off of them as my Super Bowl pick. Because I still think that there's a strong chance that they come out of the AFC. So this is all kind of making sense to me in that sense. I am curious about, so Kansas City's obviously one of the answers to this question. You said earlier in the show that the Lions were tied for fourth in number of fourth down goes this season. I'm curious about who the other teams are that have gone for it more than them. I'm curious to see what type of picture is painted.
So I'm a read the names off, and then I'm gonna tag them with, are they going when they should go?
Oh, okay.
So let's start off. Number one, the New York Giants. Number one in going when they should go for it is the New York Giants. I think that is why we saw a couple of very strange wins when Jackson Dart was able to play. And I think, they literally on Monday were a little bit more conservative in they were so conservative that Troy Aikman was saying they should have gone for it on fourth down. And so that's a real sign that there's been a little bit of change.
One of those times, at least, he was being sarcastic, I think, and trying to needle those of us with the analytics thing.
Yeah.
Continue.
But that's a team where, maybe they're down a lot. They're a lot more aggressive. The interesting portion on this is a lot of people have been asking themselves, how are the Carolina Panthers having this record? The reason why is their second and fourth down goes. They've accumulated a ton of fourth down EPA. As a result, they are also third, right after the Lions, in going for it when they should go for it. And I think that has been a major difference. The New Orleans Saints, I think, are in a very similar position as the New York Giants, where they're behind a lot. They have to go for it. They're not necessarily going for it a lot when they should go for it. That indicates to me that they're in some tough positions. And then finally, another team, Lindsay, where it's like, how is this team doing so good? The Jacksonville Jaguars. They are in the top 10 of going for it when they should go. They are tied with the Detroit Lions in that kind of rank. Some of these teams have the same because it's just, a single number, but they're tied with the Detroit Lions in going for it. And I think that's another reason and another sign that is kind of the thesis of this show, is that I think the Detroit Lions are going to bounce back on fourth down and win some of these games, because you look at the Carolina Panthers, you look at the Jaguars, who are probably, when it comes down to it, 500 or slightly below 500 teams. They have been able to win these games because they are taking advantage of that extra down.
Panthers. A lot of people asking themselves how they beat the Rams this week. And there are a lot of different answers to that.
Yeah.
But one of them is that they went 3 for 3 on fourth down attempts in that game
Exactly.
and scored 14 points on those downs directly via touchdown, and 3 more indirectly by converting a fourth down that kept a drive alive that they then kicked a field goal on. They beat the Rams 31-28. We've done this so many times this season where we have stated examples of teams going for it on fourth down and then won only because they did. If they did not, mathematically, they don't have enough points to win the game. The Rams against the Seahawks, another example. We talked about this a couple of weeks back, if anyone's interested in going and listening to that episode, which was specifically about going for it versus taking the points in those kinds of at the goal line situations with Seth Welder, and his phrase, attention asymmetry. I think it encapsulates this entire conversation too. Like, we hyper fixate on the times that don't work as opposed to the ones that do. And literally, I didn't see anyone talking about the Panthers going for it on fourth down as a reason that they won the game. And I'm sure people did, but I didn't see it come across my timeline. And I'm also not surprised that I didn't see it. Also, in that Lions game, Packers went for it on fourth down a couple of times, scored a couple of touchdowns.
And that was a big knock on Matt LaFleur in the early part of the season, that he wasn't aggressive enough. They're sitting in around the median of how often teams go for it when they should. And it's honestly great. I love great football, Lindsay. I like the Lions because they adopt this analytically forward approach. But if Matt LaFleur wants to adopt it too, I will support him. And so I'm glad that they got a win by going for it on fourth as a result.
That actually brings up an interesting point too, because he's been described as like the normally conservative Matt LaFleur went for it on fourth down, right? Like, this is out of character. I do think that there is maybe something worth looking into there about the fact that teams, even the teams that you wouldn't expect to do this, are now doing this. Like, we're seeing a lot more teams go for it on fourth down. This is becoming less anomalous, and it's becoming less just a Lions thing. I think they kind of own it narratively because they've been so consistent over the years and we're an early adopter, but we're seeing it with a great deal of frequency. And I'm wondering if we do see more teams, like we just gave a couple of examples there, that go for it on fourth down, if it doesn't cancel out the advantage of going for it on fourth down that the Lions previously had. And if that isn't one of the variance factors in play here.
Yeah. If you were to look at all 320 team seasons in the last 10 years, you would have to go to 27th to reach a team that is in 2019 in terms of go rate. And when you scroll all the way to the bottom, it's 2016, 2017, 2016, 2017. This is a relatively new phenomenon, but the reason why it is a phenomenon at all is because this problem, I don't want to say it's been solved because it's difficult to solve football, but it has been identified as a strategy that can take you from a 6-win team to an 8-win team, or like the Lions, from an 11 to 13-win team to a 15-win team. And I think that's the main difference, is in a game where we say that, the preseason, the roster gets you to 8 wins and everything else is maybe do 11 wins is coaching and maybe to 13 wins is luck. Those two wins mean a lot. And so I really like how you highlighted, Lindsay, a team that has been ascendant this year. They only have a couple of losses, is the Denver Broncos. They're not going for it when they should. They're the worst team at going for it when they should, when it adds win probability. And so that's a signifier to me that maybe in the upcoming weeks, as they play division games against good opponents, as they continue to play tough teams, that's going to come back and bite them in the coming weeks and definitely in the playoffs.
Okay, I hate to do this again. I'm going to do this because I can hear people who are coming at this from a different approach saying they're 10-2.
Right.
You're saying that they don't go for it on fourth down, and look at how many games they've won, and that's the goal, right?
Right.
So is there something that we need to consider with regards to that?
there's a great saying by the wise Nick Saban, and it's that results are the distractions. And of course, at the end of the year, you want to win as many games as possible, but you want to put yourself in good positions. And it's difficult to win. You have to have an all-pro defense to overcome things like not making correct decisions. And so, sure, they may be able to win a billion games. They may be able to win the Super Bowl, but they have an all-time defense with talent that we haven't seen maybe in the past 4 or 5 years, maybe since the last Denver Broncos Super Bowl have we seen the level of talent. But if you want to be a team like the Chiefs, for example, who have a few core pieces, but not a superstar wide receiver, an aging tight end, the left side of their line has moved, or you want to be a team like the Panthers where maybe you're confident in your quarterback, maybe you're not confident in your quarterback, but you want to win games, these are the strategies that get you there.
Sam Bruchhaus, good stuff. As always, want to remind you real quick that you guys can go to the data pages at sumersports.com and find those early down, late down splits, and a lot of these other numbers that we're talking about that are more predictive. Then I love the way that you stated that about scoring differential, that's a forward-looking stat. And a lot of these other stats that are efficiency metrics are sort of the same type of thing. Even though they're evaluating what's happened in the past, the reason that we like them better than counting stats is because they indicate when you're trying to do something, are you successful at doing that thing, as opposed to maybe just hitting 170-yard bomb or something like that, and getting your passing yards up, but it doesn't actually mean that much throughout the course of a game because it's not split up and converting into first downs. Lots of good stuff here discussed. Thank you so much to all of our guests, Dave Birkett from the Detroit Free Press, from Tej Seth and Shawn Syed, the dual components of our Stats and Scheme podcast, our Stats and Scheme newsletter, which you can subscribe to now at sumersports.com. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you again next week.